ready for the second panel discussion of the day. And to introduce it, of course, we're going to talk about two things that matter for urban development. One is sustainability, the most often repeated word in our today's world. I mean, how many times do you hear the word sustainable growth, sustainable development? Almost as often as the word innovations, I suppose. Ladies and gentlemen, so now we are going to juxtapose those two worlds, profitable and sustainable. I happen also to audit big international conferences, advise clients on strategic changes to those conferences. And one of the most common complaints that I hear from clients is whenever we want to go for green technologies in organizing events and getting the right recyclable materials, they just happen to be 4 times more expensive than the regular stuff that we use. So profitability remains one of the reasons why also in urban technologies things take slower than they might. Energy efficient buildings. What's the ultimate combo for sustainability and profit? Here to talk to you about it, please welcome Valentina, Shegoyan, Managing Partner at Reach UK, Second Century Ventures. Madam, please join us on the stage and feel free to choose your seat. That's the luxury afforded. Our next speaker will be Lech, Kaniuk, CEO of Sunroof. But I'm told, speaking of urban tech, that Lech might still be stuck in traffic, or he's with us. He's with us. Wonderful. A minute ago, he was still stuck in traffic. But what perfect timing. No better. Arjun, Jairaj, investor at AO. Arjun, join us. We have Klair, Business Development Lead at Nordics and C at WiredScore. And the panel discussion will be moderated by Burhan Pisavadi, Investment Manager, PropTech One Ventures. And it looks like we have everyone on the stage. May I kindly ask the moderator to grab the microphone and take over and enjoy discussion. Remember, make sure that the audience asks insightful, tough questions at the end. Make it worthwhile.
I will. Audience, that's on you. So thanks everyone for joining. Obviously, thank you for the MC as well. That was a really great start. We are looking at energy efficient buildings and sort of how we combine profit and sustainability. So I think to start with, if all of our sort of speakers could just intro themselves, and starting sort of straight next to me, Laura, over to you.
Thank you. I'm Klair. I am the Nordics and Central Eastern Europe lead for a WiredScore. We are a certification company focused on connectivity and smart buildings. Just to give you an idea of our scale, we are working on over 1 billion square feet of space with over 1,000 clients.
My name is Lech, and I represent Sunroof. We are a company that provides building integrated solar roofs and facades. And I actually think that we soon can say that we're the leader in the space in Europe in terms of amount of project we've realized, geographical reach and size and turnover.
My name is Valentina. I lead operations and investments of the US-based venture capital fund called Second Century Ventures in the UK. We invest in real estate technology companies. I do that for the last 5 years, but before that I was in real estate investments, real estate finance. So maybe on this panel I can represent both a tech investor and a real estate industry as well for any questions.
Hi everyone, I'm Arjun. I'm an investor at AO. We're a venture capital firm investing broadly across the life cycle of everything from pre-construction and design through building management operations, and with a focus on sustainability and working towards building a better built world. We invest in companies across Europe and North America and target seed to Series B startups. So that's ticket sizes from around 3 million to 15 million euros.
Right, fantastic. Thanks, everyone. So quickly, I'm Burhan. I'm part of the investment team at PropTech One Ventures. We're a European early-stage investor in the built environment. So I think, obviously, the built environment is a huge source of global emissions. And so it's really important that we get them energy efficient. And tech is a key way to do that. So I think if we start with the VCs on the panel, so Valentina, Arjun, how do you both view the landscape of sort of energy efficient tech for the built environment?
I would say it all follows the usual framework. There are two types of emissions. It's either embodied carbon and emissions that come out of it, or operational carbon. Within those, you can look at the life cycle of the building, and there are various technologies that tackle emissions at various stages. So it's either building material stage, construction stage, then operational stage, and then the life stage. Naturally, we as a strategic investor, we focus more on the operational side. And within the operations, I would say that the majority of emissions come from water and space heating. So as such, the energy efficiencies and technologies that help to tackle energy efficiency would probably make the biggest impact and are focus of our investments.
Yeah, I mean, I think we see the world in a similar lens. About 30% of a building's life cycle emissions are from the embodied carbon, so everything. And that's where we focus on sort of how we can design better buildings, design them for lower total cost of operations, design them to be more energy efficient. And this includes everything from new materials to helping architects and engineers use AI and other tools at their disposal to build better. But equally, also, we spend more of our time on the operational side, where 70% of the emissions come from. And here, I think the way we look at it is that there's hard tech, and there's a role for that to play. So we're looking at new forms of heating and cooling equipment and things like that. But we also look at the retrofit challenge, and I think that's probably the single biggest opportunity that we face. I think the stats are somewhere around 80 to 90% of the buildings that will be around in 2050 are already here. So how do we sort of make them a lot more efficient? And so how does technology help? The solutions are already out there, but I think it's a question of how do we create the business models, and how can technology be a lever to help address this in a scalable manner?
So I think something interesting there. So retrofit is key, clearly, and also we need some hard tech. Lech, I think over to you in terms of what the hard tech looks like and how do you make it profitable? Because ultimately, you're not installing software, you are creating a thing and installing it physically.
Well, it starts with the hardware for sure, and it's quite interesting also to have the both perspectives of the CO2, right? With the building of like the construction of the building, and then the operation. So when we do building integrated solar, both roofs and facades. The interesting thing on the construction part is that we use less materials than you would use if you build first a roof, then put a mounting system and so on. And that reduces the CO2 already, which is quite interesting. For the retrofit, it's also lighter because it's less weight on the roof, so it also fits more well to retrofitting. But then you have the solar producing the energy, right? And the hardware, so the solar modules that are producing the energy, they're getting more efficient and so on. But the interesting thing is that when we do a solar roof for most buildings, at least traditional houses and so on, they can produce more energy than house need. And when we started the company, that this was like most people were just putting PV panels on top of the roof to reduce the electrical bill. It was never, no one thought about why would I produce more energy than I need. And we see now that just a couple of years ago, there's been a really great offtake of electrical vehicles, and it starts to make sense to produce more energy. And we kind of see that it just makes much more sense to produce as much energy as you can from the space you have that is dead, to basically cover the whole energy need that you have. But we are adding a layer of energy management, because I think the hardware needs to also work with the software so that we optimize for self-consumption and that the energy is used where it's produced. And that's kind of what we see, and this is kind of our aim, to actually make all the buildings self-sufficient on energy, and hopefully with, in the future, batteries and other solutions will also create that, they will be energy sufficient. So.
Okay, but then what's sort of the business case, and also Laura, to you as well, when you're both selling your solution to buildings of all sorts, is it driven by an ROI and a payback period, or is it a case of making the world a better place and net zero? So is it really a business case here?
Yeah, it's never good enough to just say that we're doing things out of the goodness of our hearts, whilst that might be a driver for some. what we do is looking a lot at transparency. So what we want with our certification is to make it an even playing field. So tenants know exactly what they're getting when they're in a building. And also for landlords, those that are at the end of doing some amazing things, putting some amazing equipment in, have a way of telling the market that they're doing that. And also, again, on the other side, for those buildings that aren't being invested in, that aren't being kept up to date, a way for tenants to know that before they sign those 10-year leases and get caught in a building that's not fit for purpose. And a huge part of the investment case for an ROI retrofit is around, what is this going to deliver for your tenants? And tenants are willing to pay. We did a report recently which found that tenants are willing to pay almost 20% more for a building that is smart enabled. So it's not a case of people being as cheap as possible. People want space that fits their need, and they're willing to pay for it as well.
I can add to the business case, because I think I actually didn't answer that one. It's obviously a very good business case. And what's more interesting is that we're setting up a financing solution for the roofs, and this is targeted mainly, we'll hope to have for all customer segments that we serve, but we mainly target the government space, so public buildings, because we see that there's a huge need for roof renovations, there's a huge need for electricity, and there's also a huge need for transitioning into renewable energies, especially in countries like Sweden, Poland or Germany, where you have a lot of kind of black energy. And with the financing solution we're targeting to set up in the beginning of next year, the aim is actually that a city can purchase and get a roof renovation, get the clean energy, and decrease the amount they are paying per year for the electricity. So basically, it's a cash flow positive investment from day one. They get the roof renovation and they get the clean energy, and over time, obviously the span will be longer, but from a city's perspective, it's a no-brainer to actually do such a transition. So I think there's so many ways to create really great business cases which are really profitable for everyone, for the city, for the company, for the environment. So definitely there's a lot of business cases to be done.
But on that sort of generally, I always find that there's a sort of incentive misalignment in many of these cases where so for the public sector, it makes lots of sense, right? But say I'm a landlord, I've got very tight margins, I'm being pushed to retrofit my portfolio, my tenants will pay less bills, I don't really benefit. Why should I invest in in retrofitting? So actually, Valentina, I can see you've got a point there. Well, how do you view the space?
Yeah, I'm going to wear a real estate hat now. So as a former real estate investor, you need to understand how the industry thinks. It's not only about top line and cash flow, it's also ultimately about who do I sell this building to in the future, at what yield and cap rate, and what are risks associated with the building. So ultimately, a better building, sustainable building, would attract a better quality tenant. Better quality tenant would lead to a lower interest rate when I go to the bank to refinance my property. And another huge issue in the real estate today being actively discussed is, am I going to be able to sell this building in 10 years at all? Even with positive cash flow, is there a next buyer, and how my exit cap rate is going to be affected? So ultimately it boils down to three other factors, which is on top of rent and top line, is my relationship with the tenant and who are the tenant, then also my relationship with my own investors, my LPs, what type of capital am I going to be able to attract, depending on what type of solutions I'm investing, how sustainable my portfolio is, and then will this building comply with all the regulations that are now only, like there are more and more of them coming, and there is a huge, but it's a big number. So the real risk in the industry is the risk of stranded assets. And it is estimated that there is 1 trillion in commercial real estate only of assets that are going to be stranded in the next 10 years in the UK only. It's a massive, massive number. So it's not only about ROI, it's also more strategic.
I can add to that, because we've had 2 cases where, this is my chief dog officer. We've had 2 cases where owners of real estate, which have tenants renting, they've had a setup of so-called a cold rent, where the tenants are paying for the electricity and for the heating and everything themselves on meters. And both cases are in Sweden, where you have quite a limited amount, like limited possibilities to increase the rent. So there's kind of very difficult to increase the rents and make a better yield on the real estate. So these two real estate owners, what they did, they actually invested in a sunroof and transformed the agreements from cold rents to warm rents, which means basically that the tenants now pay more per month, but all the electricity and heating and everything is included in the rent. What happens is actually that the real estate owner is the producer of the electricity. So that's the way he actually starts to make more money. So that's another interesting case we've actually seen happening to add to those things.
And I think to that point, there's a role for regulation as well here. Recently in Germany, I think landlords were allowed to start investing in rooftop solar and then selling that energy to their clients. So I guess there are ways to align the incentives through government intervention as well.
So do you see it as a government push, or do you see it as a business model innovation push to try and align the incentives further?
I think it's a combination of both, but you need the mechanism to allow landlords to do this. I know in some markets there's still not, still not something that landlords can get into, becoming energy suppliers. Yeah.
As an investor, I would be more focused on market and stakeholders sorting it out so that it becomes commercially viable. I can't, as an investor, rely too much on regulations, because those change. As we know, they have been introduced, deadlines are pushed back, so it's hard for me to bet on it, and it will be unfair on my own investors. But I can see that the market is moving for all the reasons mentioned.
I would add another party in this that could actually make a big difference, and where we see that there's a misalignment or misunderstanding somehow, and that's banks, because banks are using traditional scoring. So when for example, customers want to retrofit or renovate the roof, put a sunroof on top of their house, the bank is actually looking at this as like an investment, like it would be purchasing a car for 50,000 euros, and not really, transitioning the electrical bill to be something that cash flow actually will not go to the power utility company, but they will go to the bank. And it seems like they're not all understands this, and because from that perspective, the customers are actually becoming a much better customer to the bank. So I think banks are also something that needs some education on this part.
And just final one for me. I think the innovation piece has to be key here, because I think one of the big issues in the real estate market at the moment is we've got a misalignment with landlords, tenants, rather than customer experience. And for them, they are going to vote with their feet, as you mentioned earlier. They're not going to stay in a building that's not fit for purpose. And unfortunately, for these big global tenants, the expectation on them for the data that they're expected to provide is huge. And if you look after 200 offices across, a whole of an EMEA region, and you've got one building sending you an Excel spreadsheet with some numbers that are obviously made up, and you've got someone else with a fantastic system that's delivering you a live dashboard of the usage of your tenants' energy, you're going to have two very different user experiences. And then you're going to start to veer towards landlords who are able to give that to you.
Okay, so it seems, at least for the commercial side, at least, it's quite clear. Right? If you're a commercial real estate owner, investor, it makes sense to retrofit. You get you can get better refinancing down the line. You've got tenants who are more likely to pay a premium. But in the resi space, where it's either you're stuck there in the sort of the social housing side, or there's sort of owner-owned, or it's one person who owns 3 properties, it's not institutional capital. How can that segment actually become energy efficient, and how can they do it in a sustainable and profitable way?
Yeah, well, with the owner-owned side, I think what we're seeing now with some of the data on single-family households, at least in the US, I think last year was the first time that heat pump adoption was greater than new gas furnace sales. So I think you're coming to a point where the cost and performance of these new technologies is on par with, if not better than, incumbent technologies, and that's only going to keep going down over time. And so the ROI is there. If you think about any homeowner today, it's going to be ROI driven, right? And you're talking about a lot of these investments have paybacks in, the order of like 5, 10, 15 years. So I think for them, it's all about, being able to support and to justify the cost. And we also think that there's a sort of an order of merit or priority matrix here. So insulation, for example, is usually the lowest ticket item, usually has a payback of a couple of years and has immediate sort of comfort and energy reduction benefits. Whereas something like, energy storage might work in some markets where there's time of use tariffs and things like that. So there's no one size fits all, but we're already seeing that some technologies make sense in already. So.
I think we're also seeing more kind of government, more stick than carrot in the resi market as well, with the introduction of things like MEES being forced to make sure that these buildings are meeting certain energy standards and fines for not meeting them. I think that's what people are feeling the cost of more.
Well, just to play devil's advocate, it's a cost of living crisis in Europe, and it's hard for the government to use this stick because it's a big, it may create big issues with the next election. So I honestly don't think that it's that easy, and ROI on retrofits for residential and single-family homes is not obvious either, because the payback, I'm told, it can be 30 years. Me as a resident in my property with mortgage, 2 kids, school age, I think that it's going to be very much deprioritized. What I understand, the solutions are coming from, there are two major hurdles and 2 major sources of solutions in that space. First, convenience. So me as for convenience and education, me as a resident in my own property, I need to understand the impact my property makes, and also where do I go. So there needs to be, unlike in commercial space, more platform solutions. It's less about immediate ROI on a small precise technology, but rather here's the one-stop shop where you go and retrofit all of your building, all of your property, you don't need to go elsewhere. And I know there are companies emerging in that space. And second is funding. So to make it fully equity funded on me by increasing my mortgage, for example, I'm highly unlikely to take this. So there are some subsidies, so I'm more talking about the carrot then, subsidies coming from governments when you want to retrofit a building from EPC, whatever, to one notch up. So just to play devil's advocate here, it's not that easy and trivial. So it's not about, hey, you'll just start saving on your energy bill. Well, not really. It requires quite a bit of investment. Heat pumps are expensive.
I would say that it's a mix of a lot of different things, and I think we will see a huge uptick of this being much more and more profitable and so one thing is, we did a research. We asked our customers, do you have or do you plan to have an electrical vehicle? And we got, if we take customers that answered, I have or I plan to have within 5 years, the number of our customers that did that is 100%. So 100% of our customers are either already having an electrical vehicle or planning to have one, which means that if you have a roof that produces more energy than the house need for heating with the heat pump and all the electrical appliances, and you have a surplus, then you can start to use that for your fuel. And that starts to make your kind of ROI become better and better, because the cost per kilometer or mile traveled with your own electricity in your EV makes a lot of sense, even if the EV is quite expensive right now. But given the adoption, given the development and scale of batteries, I think we'll see the cost for EVs dropping quite significantly. So I really think that we won't need to have government subsidies. We won't have to have a lot of things. I think it just makes much more sense. But there's a lot of education still to be done, and show people, like, if you really produce your energy for your house and living, that really makes a lot of sense.
So as devil's advocate, there's a perception that the people who are installing solar tend to be quite well-to-do, they've got money to spare, and they're a minority of kind of a general population. And could it be a sample size thing where your customer base, they've got the money and they really care, whereas most people, if you're renting, you can't, and otherwise you don't have the money to?
No, for sure. I mean, yes, our customers are not 100% good representation of the total population, but I would say that it's maybe Poland is more to the edge of upper middle class and above. But I would say Sweden, if we look at the project we're doing in Sweden, these are roof renovations for very average houses. It's not really, top upscale. And the reason is also that, to have a building integrated solution isn't a super luxury. I mean, Tesla solar tiles a couple of years ago, super expensive per watt install or however you would count it. But today, the products we're offering, like if you have a simple roof without a lot of ventilations and windows and a lot of stuff happening on the roof, you can really make that quite cheap. And on average, we're like 10 to 20% more expensive than a roof plus PV, but it looks better, and we can fit more power into the roof than top-mounted PV. But we currently have right now a project where it's 20,000 square meters. And we are actually becoming basically cheaper than a traditional roof, or at least roof plus PV, because you get, our solar modules are big tiles. We use less material. So when you get scale, when you get big surfaces, this really, is super competitive to what's already on the market. So it's not a high-end product anymore, I would say.
And then I'm also guessing that can be a third-party investor, because you mentioned before that quite often those solar panels that help you generate excessive energy. That means that you can structure it in a way that it's not the owner of the property who finances it, but there is a third party that has long-term capital, long-term horizon, and will be fine with longer payback periods. So that's what I meant, one-stop shops and structured financing solutions that's possible to solve that. Next time I'm coming with my kids.
Yeah, I'm sorry. He's 16 years old and he needs a lot of attention, like special care, because he's on a lot of medication. I couldn't leave him, so sorry for that. But he's a good sport.
No, it's quite. I don't mind the dog either. It's quite cute. But in terms of sort of your point, Valentina, so do you think for sustainable buildings to be profitable, do you think it's a new asset class or a new type of asset class? And would you invest in some kind of company that is actually turning retrofits or energy efficient solutions into a revenue stream?
Well, we do invest in those. We have a company in the US that does installation of solar roofs, solar panels on roofs, and it's a matter of matching income profile with investor profile. So it's not necessarily venture capital that should fund their capex itself. So there are other investors, but tech or a company that executes on that as an operator, as a technology that connects all parties together. That's very much our piece of bread or bread and butter. Yeah.
We hope to have such a fund. Like an SPV for funding solar roofs, and as you mentioned, it's not a typical VC, and depending also on the class, because you can actually structure it in many ways. So one way to structure it is basically that a customer purchases the roof from us, but the SPV is taking over the receivables, and that's a different type of investor. But you can have also something called an IPP model, which basically means that no one is actually buying that. The SPV is buying the roof, let's say, and they own everything, and they also own the energy that is produced, but then they have someone that is purchasing the energy, usually the owner of the building. So there's different ways to structure that, and definitely, it's an asset that potentially, produces a lot of energy over decades, and with higher energy prices, well, the ROI should be quite nice.
Okay, fantastic. So it seems like, before we hand over to questions, it seems like to really get buildings to be energy efficient and profitable, let's either see it as an investment. If you are of the landlord or institutional capital, you're investing in better tenants and better returns that way. Or if it's the other side, it's think of it as offsetting your costs with energy or a new revenue stream as well entirely. So I think over to sort of the audience. Have any questions?
Do we have questions? 3 minutes left.
Hi all, thank you for your comments. I'm Brittany, I'm co-founder of QFlow. One thing that has been coming up a lot, particularly in the UK, is the balance between operational carbon and embodied carbon in buildings and how we address that from the stranded asset point that you made earlier. When you're thinking about the sort of retrofit of buildings, particularly when we're talking about solar tiles, which I think is absolutely incredible, how are you accounting for that life cycle assessment, and how are you seeing asset owners respond to that sort of tension between embodied carbon and operational?
Oh, if that's a question to me, that's good. So, well, I'm not really sure how I should answer that question. So when we look at the, solar in general is basically one of the lowest carbon emission energy sources you can get. And installing a solar roof, you will have a production of energy for probably 50, 60 years. But let's say after 30 years, still like 80% nominal power output. So you still produce quite a lot of energy. And what is the alternative? So the alternative is that the building is using other energy sources. So I think from that perspective, it is a plus, right? Then if the roof also needs to be replaced, and usually even if you have like ceramic tiles or whatever else you have, you still need to maintain that and do renovations after a few years. We don't have good data. This is still yet to be proved, but our modules have a tempered and prepared glass surface. So usually the maintenance you have is rain. And rain is usually taking off whatever is landed on the roof. And also over time, there will be a better aging because glass ages better than other materials that you use traditionally on the roof. But the other thing is interesting also that when the energy is produced by the tiles, they are heated. They get quite warm. So nothing wants to grow on top of the roof. So in some areas where it's quite moist, there might be moss or other stuff that wants to grow on the roof, so you can add this maintenance, and the design and aesthetic also appealing. But I would say that it is basically transforming the building to produce energy, which is having one of the lowest carbon footprints. And then on top of that, we mentioned very briefly software, but I think that's also going to play a quite big role because in some buildings you will have a big overproduction. And if you can start to do something called very generally like a virtual power plant, which basically means that you can use the energy in other buildings. And I know that there are some countries that are already looking at how can we make it possible for a neighbor selling the energy to another neighbor. Or when we talk with cities, they say, hey, we have thousands of buildings, but if you can produce energy there and we can use the energy somewhere else, now that starts to be super interesting. And I think if we're talking about buildings that are aging or old, or I'm not super familiar with that class of real estate, but I think they can play a role also to become power plants. I mean, and also from my perspective, I love solar, but I hate solar farms, like these acres of land being covered by solar panels. I think that's such a waste, because if we look at the cities, we have acres of square meters of unused surface where the energy actually used. So I really hope that we will start to work towards producing energy when we actually consume it.
And to address the part of the question where you were talking about embodied carbon of new developments versus operational carbon of those that we are to retrofit, there is an important trade-off. So at the moment, if you retrofit the building fully, if you apply all sorts of technologies that currently exist, at best you can achieve 50% reduction on CO2 emission levels on the operational side. So arguably, it's easier to do a new building that will be net zero efficient from day one than to retrofit existing. But there is a caveat there. At present, market does not penalize, so there is no full price for carbon embodied in buildings for new developments, but that's changing. So at the moment when it will be fully priced, developers will start being discouraged to do new developments, and it will all turn into retrofits. And that's where I'm hopeful that technologies that are emerging today, that we are going to see today at this event, are going to start solving more than 50%. So hopefully we'll get into 100% territory on retrofits at some point.
I think that's quite a nice note to end us on. I know our time has come down to 0, so I think hopefully that's answered sort of, well, at least your question, Brittany, not anyone else's. But thank you, everyone, for sort of taking part today.
And thank you very much to the moderator, too. Yes, this side of the stage. Thank you once again. Congratulations. Very insightful discussion.